I value our friendship, wrote Tom, and I look forward to tomorrow as a man in your life who can offer you understanding, support, happiness, and love. Understanding, support, happiness, and love. Delia mulled his words over. That was all a girl could ever hope to find, and here it was, wrapped up in a convicted felon who was weaseling his way into Delia's heart, and she knew it. She knew it, she couldn't stop it, and she didn't even want to. She wanted to enjoy the tingly excitement of feeling loved unconditionally, and she'd be damned if she were going to look at the situation rationally. Reality could wait.
That was Jan Bono reading from her new novel, Pen Pals. Hi, I'm Alan Rose. Welcome to Book Chat. And we're delighted to have Jan with us up from Long Beach Peninsula for our interview today. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Alan. I'm always happy to be invited. We have such pleasant conversations.
Yes, we do, don't we? In your new novel, Delia Griswold is 39 years old, and she's decided that she would like to have someone special in her life by the time she's 40. So to do that, since she lives out on the coast in Lincoln City, she's going to have some personal ads in the Oregonian to meet possible men. One of the people who responds to her is, in fact, living in a penitentiary, hence a wonderful title, Pen Pals. But he's also a wonderful writer, and she feels a connection with him and decides to carry on this correspondence. Wow.
Yeah, wow.
How did you get this idea?
Well, they say, life imitates art or art imitates life or something like that, but they also say that when you're looking for companionship, you need to cast a wider net. And back in the 90s, was there a time before we had the internet and before we had online dating? The only way you could make a connection out of your immediate area was to place a personal ad in the newspaper. And I had placed several personal ads in several different newspapers because it is a small little community along the coast, and once you know everybody, you know everybody.
Right.
And so when I placed the ad that garnered so much response, I had said that I was a coastal creature, loving the beach but not liking the isolation. And so I said, maybe you'd like to visit the beach now and then or something. And I got over 60 responses. And I was sitting in my hairdresser's chair, and she said, so how's it going, looking for a date? And I said, it's going. And she said, what do you mean? I said, it's a bitter bunch. I said, I got over 60. And there are only about 4 or 5 who can put a whole sentence together.
And that must be difficult for an English teacher.
Oh, absolutely. I was punctuation, I can let it slide a little bit. A few spelling errors, that's okay. But the grammar, oh boy, that's just going to get me. One man had written, and he was looking for a mother for his 4 children. And he wanted me to bake him some chocolate chip cookies. And he said, send me a dozen chocolate chip cookies. I'll have my kids decide if you're someone that I should date. And I sent him a package of Nestle's Toll House, the morsels, the chocolate morsels, and said, it's a bonding activity for you to bake with your children.
Okay, so that didn't go that far then.
That didn't go. I never heard from him again, and that was just fine.
Okay. So from this story then, how did you spin it out to make it the very interesting novel that you did?
Well, thank you. In the beginning, when I sent the personal ad, it's in a thing called a blind box. And all of the men send their responses to the newspaper, just with a code number. And then those code numbers are gathered up, and you're sent the packet of them once a week for 3 weeks. And then they decide that nobody's going to see the paper after it's been out 3 weeks. And they actually have a section, or had a section in the newspaper for, the Lonely Hearts Club kind of thing. And so I had decided, what if, I play what if a lot, what if it's someone from my community? What if, someone from the school board sees that I'm advertising for a boyfriend? What if, so I drove to another town, got a mailbox, put 2 names on it, one of them my own and one of them Delia Griswold, and I decided I was going to at least cover my backside, so if somebody goes, is that her? That I didn't have to, reveal my real name or my real, town or anything until I was comfortable getting to know them a little bit. So I felt like I was protected. So that was the way that I, dipped my toe in that water because, people don't want to think that a friend of theirs is setting themselves up for, being the victim of a stalker or something. And I thought I was pretty well covered. So when I went into it, I wrote to almost all of them. And some of them 2 or 3 times. But still, it was a hard going.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the book. In the book, Delia is impressed by a letter from Thomas Randolph Jones, goes by Tom Jones, and Tom Jones is very forward, up front, that he is in the penitentiary, and he talks about why and how he got there. And through this experience, Delia and Tom do develop a bond, and you explore that, I think, very well through the letters, the actual letters that they exchange. I was struck by several things with this book. So different from your earlier works, your Cozy Mysteries with Sylvia Avery, which were all written first person. This is third person. Why and how did you make that decision?
Well, I wrote the first chapter both ways. I knew how I wanted it to start, and I thought if I write it in first person, then I can be inside of Delia's head, and what would she think, and those kind of things come out a lot differently than if you're standing outside of it looking in. I also didn't want people to think it was too autobiographical. I mean, there are situations in the book that absolutely have happened. There's no surprise that that I would use those kind of events, but also I didn't want people to say, oh yeah, and kind of squint their eyes at me. But I was not ready to write this book for many years. This took place in the 90s, and in the 90s I was writing a humorous personal experience newspaper column for the Chinook Observer. So everybody expected me to write the fluff. This isn't fluff.
Right.
But the Cozy Mysteries, I worked into writing those, and after those 6 books, and I went, well, that was too much fun, but it wasn't very substantial. And so I transitioned with a book just before this, in fact, written this year too, called Is There Room in the Backyard for One More Body? Which is kind of a tongue-in-cheek thing that my mother and I used to joke about. And so I had written 12 short stories in third person to see if I could do it. And I put that out to some beta readers, and I said, you've read my cozies. What do you think? Is this got more impact to it? Is it viable? Am I shifting, into tenses and things? And everybody encouraged me to go with third person. And when I wrote the first chapter both ways, I sent it to some more beta readers. And I said, give me a vote. Every one of them said third person. So it came out in third person. I was finally ready. I mean, it took me 28 years from the time I got the idea, which originally Pen Pals was going to be about the whole group that sent me and what happened with each piece of it. And then it kind of honed down and whatever, and talking to my hairdresser, it's, well, what if there's a murderer? What if, and I said, well, they're in prison, I'm safe, and yet, of the 60-something, the one who wrote the best, which, sucked me right into that was, the person who's incarcerated.
Also in the Cozy Mysteries, and also in your Chicken Soup for the Soul series that you've written, you use a lot of humor. And this book is very different in that it doesn't have the humor sort of goes along with what you're talking about in terms of the substance. This is a much more serious book. What was that like, shifting from your humor that you're used to into a more serious mode?
That was the hardest part. It really was. The one scene that when I think about the book and I go, was there any humor in it? There is. It's kind of, my grandmother was from England, so she always says it's very dry. You know, it's kind of slides under the door. But the scene where she gets the letter from him and he uses the L word, you know, and she drinks over it. She drinks a lot over it. And then she slides out of her chair onto the living room floor. And they find her in the morning and said, your mother's been trying to call you. And I found that really funny. But that was me. You know, of course I think it was funny.
In the story, the relationship develops between Delia and Tom, and the reader learns about Tom's past. He's had a very violent past. He's also done a lot of work on himself. And there's the question that the book poses is he really a new man through this? And of course, that's a major question for Delia. Particularly since when we learn that he's going to be up for parole soon, and Delia has to make some decisions. In this book, you've got a best friend, an old work colleague, Sally Wilcox, and she sort of acts as Delia's voice of caution, voice of reason, and you have a lot of interesting dynamics between them, where Delia wants to respect what Sally is saying, but also begins to push her away, not wanting to hear the caution. How did that come about?
Have I mentioned I'm a Gemini?
Okay. So with Geminis, it's easy to split.
With the sign of the twins and being able to look at a situation from several different angles, there was the relationship between Delia and her co-worker, Sally, and with Delia and her family, a mother and a brother. And also with her boss. There's a little flavor of that in there. I think he knows, but he doesn't really, you know, take her to task for it. But she wonders about, you know, in the book, Delia is a family nurse practitioner. So what if her clients found out that she was dating a man or involved with a man who was in prison? And how she wrestled with how much is too much. Where do I fit in this? I'm just looking for love, basically, in all the wrong places. But, you know, can people get second chances? Can they change? And Sally says, I'm not so sure about that. And so Delia actually calls, as I did, the prison and talks to somebody in the corrections counseling area, not specifically about a person, but asking about recidivism rates. And they're not good. There's 80% recidivism. And I said, well, then 20% are rehabilitated. And I'm thinking, you know, maybe there's hope here. Maybe this could happen, that could happen, whatever. And he said, well, the other 20% we just don't catch.
We just don't catch.
Yeah, and when he said that, ice water went through my veins, and I thought, well, Delia's not going to be able to. And then I thought, Delia's not going to listen. Her heart's involved. You know the saying, the heart wants what the heart wants?
Yeah.
You know, so I wasn't sure. In fact, I wasn't sure how this book was going to end until I got about two chapters, maybe 3 from the end. I had 4 ways figured out. You know, and one of them was the, you know, Sunshine Roses Happily Ever After, and I desperately wanted that. And then one of them was, you know, he's a stalker and she gets murdered in her sleep. And then, you know, and there were 2 other things in between. And I didn't know where I was going to take it because I didn't really, you know, we don't know what we really feel about some things until we write about them.
Yeah.
And when you see it down in black and white, you go, oh yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I'm thinking.
This is interesting for you because I know from past discussions you are a plotter. You like to have the whole story worked out before you ever start seriously writing. And so this was a departure. Again, you departed from the first person narrative to the third person. You departed from a basically humorous approach to a very serious approach. And it sounds like, at least for the end, you didn't know how your own story was going to end.
I thought I did. But you know, even in the cozy mysteries, there were 4 books out of the 6 that did not end the way my outline ended.
Oh.
Because I let the characters kind of drive it, And I let the characters drive it in here too.
Mhm.
What's Tom going to tell her? How is she going to respond?
Mhm.
Will she distance herself before he's paroled? Will she meet him?
Mhm.
And I had it worked out several different ways. It's like, choose your own path. and I kind of let the characters just dictate to me.
So Delia, Tom, Sally, they sort of helped you decide what you finally decided.
They were a driving force with, the potential of, good versus evil kind of thing, and also the rational, what kind of cost is this? Because in the book, Delia's brother calls her and says, my wife wants nothing to do with you and wants you to tear our pages out of your address book, get rid of any evidence that you have family. They have several children, 4, I think I put, 4 children, and we don't want him come knocking on our door. Our last names are the same, those kind of things.
Yeah, they were very, very worried when he would be released. Yeah. Something else that you did in this book that I thought was very, very helpful in understanding the ways of the heart. Tom in prison with his very violent past, through their correspondence, he helps Delia heal on some past trauma that she's had. I thought that was very effective because it made the reader question, well, this fellow seems like he does have insight into the human heart, and it sounds like he is compassionate toward her. And without saying, what finally happens, I liked that dynamic that you created, this ambiguity where we could begin to believe that Tom has a chance, as well as being still wary, but we could also see the effect, the positive effect, the therapeutic effect this correspondent relationship has had on Delia.
Well, Delia had been married previously. She's 39. She's married in her early 20s, well, mid-20s, I think. And she'd been divorced a few years when she said, well, it's time to have another relationship. And she had never been honest with her husband about the traumas that she had endured. And yet, when she's wrote to this man in prison, and he admits to what he's done, and then he says, it wasn't your fault. And then he helps her, and she allows him to help her. She's been to counselors. She hasn't been honest with them. She's kind of put that, compartmentalized, that part doesn't exist in my life kind of thing, just shut the door on it and forget about it. But it had affected all aspects of her relationships. So she was finally ready to have someone help her through it, and lo and behold, it's someone who has been a perpetrator of such crimes.
So it was both, she was ready, but there was also that there was the right person for her, and maybe the right format. This may have not been possible for her talking to Tom, but through the correspondence, their relationship evolves and develops, and she allows herself to share that level of honesty. So I thought that was very, very effective.
And he has such a sympathetic core. I believe that, as I was creating, their dynamic and things, that he would have, one of those verbs, every possibility of understanding where she was from, of being sympathetic with that, and of holding her hand to say, it wasn't you, it was him.
When you were writing this, or writing in general, what's the easiest part of writing for you?
I love it all. I love creating characters, and I start with a character sketch thing, and how old are they, what do they look like, hair color, eye color, what do they drive, that kind of thing, what do they do for a living. And I also love putting the dialogue in their mouths. I just love saying, oh, look what she said. and he said what? And because it's not me, it's just, we're going to tell this story and let it fly.
You're able to immerse yourself into another world with other people and create that.
Yeah, it's a safe place.
Great. What's the hardest part?
Editing.
Right. Editing.
No doubt about that one. It is always editing.
Why are we not surprised?
Sometimes, well, in junior high, I was in home ec class, and we, would stitch the hems around the skirts and things we made, and I was the seam ripper queen. So you'd think doing editing, I'd be used to just tearing it all apart and starting over. But editing is hard because you fall in love with your words.
Mm-hmm.
Think what's a better way to do this,
Mm-hmm.
and it's difficult. Sometimes I've set a book aside for maybe a month and then gone back and gone through with my my machete,
Mm-hmm.
just whacked it apart to make it something better.
Do you use a professional editor?
Define professional.
A editor who does it for a living.
No.
Okay.
What I use, I start with beta readers,
Okay.
and a beta reader is for the people watching, a beta reader is just a person who likes to read, who says, I'll read it, I'll tell you if there's holes in the plot, if something doesn't make sense, if that isn't believable, tell me, just give me some straight feedback. It's not proofreading. It's not marking, you forgot a comma here. What it is just telling me if there's a viable story there, and it follows through. And then once I get it through about 6 of those, and I let them all see it at the same time, and then I go back and look at everything they've said, and then I do that E word, and I edit some. And then I have a woman who gets paid to edit, but not me. I send her gift cards to restaurants in her area because she says, oh, I couldn't, we're friends. And I said, yeah, we're friends, but I value your expertise. So she goes through it. And then when I go through hers, I have one more. She's my ace in the hole. Her name is Anna Marie. And I have used her in my columns all the way back through the 90s and everything as being my best friend. In reality, I went to kindergarten with her, I graduated with her, and I hadn't seen her again or heard from her until about 10 years ago.
Wow.
So it was amazing that, she would be on my mind so much that it's like the law of attraction, it manifests back in. But Anna Marie taught junior high, English, and Spanish. And in the cozies, I had some Spanish in there that I needed to get right. And of course, I wanted all the grammar and the punctuation, everything correct too. And this book, she sent me a note back and she said, I hate you. She says, I found 4 things and they're nitpickers. and I said, well, maybe I'm writing better. And she said, maybe you're finding your groove. And I really felt that was the biggest compliment ever.
Great. Yeah.
Yeah.
What's next for you?
Next is always a wonderful thing. This summer, when I finish Pen Pals, and I sell my books mostly out of my trunk, and I drag a cart around to bazaars, holiday bazaars and craft fairs and things. And when I finished this, I thought, the books are getting too heavy, and they're taking up too much space in my garage, my dining room, my guest room, my living room. They're everywhere. And so I took a screenwriting class. And it was a very specific screenwriting class because it fit my schedule. It wasn't what I thought I was going after, but I went after it anyway because it gelled right, and it turned out to be excellent for me. It was Hallmark-based Christmas movie. And at the end of 12 weeks, I have a 105-page, 9-act, so many scenes, Hallmark Christmas movie written, although the instructor tells me it will not be accepted. I broke too many rules.
Okay.
They have very specific rules, and you have to follow it precisely. But he's also given us, there were 8 of us in the class. It was a Zoom class. And he's given us 6 months to rewrite completely, and I'm waiting 2 months before I even look at it, and then rewrite it and get it back to him, and he'll give us one more read. And we'll see, because I would like to take my cozy mysteries and write them as made-for-TV movies. And then there's this one. I think there might be more for it. I don't know yet. I'm letting the universe just kind of tell me. I know that sounds a little woo-woo.
But take your screenwriting experience, skills that you've developed, and apply them to the cozy mysteries and possibly Pen Pals.
Yep. I learned to do a new software program called Final Draft. It formats for you. So you know where the characters go and the dialogue and the action lines and the Rileys, which are those little parenthetical statements. I didn't know that when I started.
Great. Well, Jan, congratulations on another book, and a very different book. And we wish you well on the next one coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good to see you, Alan.